Welcome to the V2UK Roundtable Luncheon. Can agency fees be justified? The debate will be chaired by Nick Salmon, who I'm sure you all know, had a very influential career in the industry and is currently the Managing Director of Property Eye. Nick's asked that if you wish anything to be off the record, you should preface your comment with, "I'd like this to be off the record, please." Otherwise it will be very much on the record and reported.
So we're talking mainly today about agency fees in relation to lettings, how those are presented, how they affect tenants, how they affect landlords, and what agencies do to create transparency in how their fees are presented.
In terms of tenants, we charge a cost for preparing the tenancy agreement, legally binding document, and that cost is shared between the landlord and the tenant. So we charge half the cost of that to the landlord and half to the tenant. We think it's a reasonable charge in terms of what it would cost a landlord to have a professionally drawn up tenancy agreement provided by a solicitor. We effectively do the conveyancing job, if you like, of a solicitor, exactly like a solicitor does with a purchase. We charge them for referencing, which is a cost that we're merely passing on, if you like, because we pay a professional referencing company to do that. The tenancy agreement fee that we charge the tenant is a one-off cost to them, and it doesn't matter how many tenants there are. I think that what's wrong is where agents have started to charge tenants a cost per head.
Yeah.
And I think that's where things have gone wrong.
Okay.
Not only a cost per head, so if you've got 4 tenants or 5 tenants, they're charging a cost per individual. I also think that in some cases the fees are too high.
Everything costs, and the cost has got to go somewhere, and therefore splitting the fees in between the landlords and the tenants is fair due. If the tenants weren't to have it, someone would have to pick it up, and it would probably either go to increasing the rent or the landlord picking it up, and then you have to weigh in the balance of is it worth it? So the rent would go up, and therefore tenants would end up paying for it anyway.
Okay.
I don't think that landlords really, there's not a demand for them to know how much the tenants are being charged. And my view on it as well, just to add to what's been said already, is the fact that I think we're forgetting about the fact that there's trained staff in place. These people, although they don't have the full marketplace to go and have a look at every single property unless it's with an agent, obviously, and the majority of properties are with agents, but it's not as if we're forcing the hand of these tenants. We're not saying you have to rent this property, you have to pay this fee. They don't want to, they don't go for it, I've never had an instance where the tenant is put off because of the fee. I have heard of instances where an agent is charging quite a high administration fee, and then I get the complaint from that tenant when they come and see us.
Do you think these administration charges are an issue within the lettings business overall? Not just at the high end.
I think it's been made an issue. I think it's been made an issue by certain organisations.
Right.
And I think that whenever you get that scenario of an organisation making such a big deal of it and getting a lot of press from it, then obviously that's going to heighten it and it's going to make it worse. You couldn't possibly
referring to Dan in any way, shape or form?
Of course not.
No, that's fine.
I think as well, maybe I want to just add in there the fact that obviously we are businesses and we do need to make money at the same time. And I think that from that point of view, there needs to be a profit margin there. And actually, if you drill down to it, the profit margins are not as big as they're being made out to be.
Well, in our experience, I've never met a tenant that thinks that agent fees are justified, because they're almost entirely. I mean, this list of things that you've gone through is quite helpful, but none of those are actually services for the tenant. They're services for the landlord, and therefore we think that the landlord should be paying for them. You mentioned that vetting a tenant costs £20. So tenants are very rarely charged £20 for that. They're usually charged about £150, that kind of mark. So that's an enormous markup.
150.
No.
Which agents are there?
Yeah.
I don't have that one.
No.
So that would include an inventory, cost and an agreement cost, because
Yeah.
I think you've got to take into account that those are for the benefit of both parties.
Well, I don't think
Yeah, sorry.
the inventory is there so that to protect the landlord against.
No, it's
No,
not.
it's not.
Absolutely
No.
not.
No.
That is not the situation. The
It's a
situation
fundamental
clearly
right.
is
Hang on,
that.
let's have Bill.
Well,
Just give
my
us the
view about that
definition.
is quite clear. That actually is
For
to
both.
protect both
Mm.
parties, because otherwise you could either take stuff out or you could put it in.
Yeah,
It
who
doesn't
said
matter which
what?
party does it or what the damage is.
Mhm.
So I think there is, and the schedule of condition is also extremely important in this situation. And the tenancy agreement must be an agreement between both parties, which is clearly agreed. So those items, I personally think, should be shared costs.
I don't know whether I'm going too far and we talk about this later or not, but obviously if you're passing the cost onto the landlord for something like this, then in effect you're pushing that cost onto the landlord. The landlord has to pick up that cost somewhere else. And the only other way they're going to pick that cost up is by charging more in their rent.
They might, or they could, they could take
I
it.
can 100% assure you that because they approach it from a business point of view, they will be putting the rents up to try and cover the cost.
If the fees were actually justified, and I think that's what goes to the heart of this question, maybe the tenants would think we're party to this. Whereas often tenants are just told, this is the fee, it's for a reference. And people
Yeah.
are intelligent, they can Google things, they know that that's unfair.
Yeah.
But if you were saying, this is the fee to you, your portion of it, and the reason that we're charging that fee is to give you a safe and secure environment to bring up your kids or to live or whatever, and to make sure you get your money back.
Now, I think there's quite a large number within the market, but if you take the market as a whole, it's a very small percentage. Because if I could just give you, I'm not going to kill you with statistics, but if you actually think in terms of my scheme, or our scheme and property ombudsman, we probably have 85% of the letting agents as members and about over 90% of the sales agents. Of that, we find that 2/3 of the complaints are actually about lettings and 1/3 about sales. We get 25,000 complaint inquiries, of which slightly less than 3,000 will actually go to the Ombudsman for determination. So you're actually talking about 3,000 of which, say 2,000 at the absolute maximum, relate to lettings out of all the agents that we have. I'm afraid it doesn't include your office, but it does include yours. That seems to me that the actual amount which is usually determined is relatively small, and the amount
That's 3 out of 3.2 million.
yeah, but actually even then the amount which is awarded by the Ombudsman, which is not a damages figure, it's actually to put you back financially where you should be, is somewhere in the order of about £400 to £500, and that's the average across everything. It includes the very big ones that we get occasionally when we do get a really bad one. So it is actually, relatively speaking, a relatively low level element, even compared with the fees which the tenants or the landlords might be charged over the course of a year. But nevertheless, there are a lot of complaints. My stance has always been to try and improve standards in the industry ever since I left the industry. And I believe certainly that's happened very well. It's happened a lot in the sales side, because actually the amount that's awarded by Ombudsman over the years has reduced. And I believe that this is beginning to get through on the letting side, but as yet we still have quite a bit of learning to do in the industry. If you're frightened or you think you're charging too much and you don't want to tell what it is, then you shouldn't be in business, in my view. And you should only charge a fee which you think is appropriate. But I do think that it's right that somebody's making the point that you can't actually run an agency or a business as a landlord unless you are making a relative profit. And I don't believe that there's many portfolios that are making really high. I don't think there'd be very many. I think it'd be very unusual to find a double-digit return on a portfolio.
The bad element of landlords and agents, those who do not comply, tend to sully the entire industry, have a disproportionate effect on those who are doing it properly. Discussed. Agreed?
I totally agree.
100%.
Is it a given?
Totally agree.
Would you subscribe to that view?
Yeah, I think there's a whole spectrum of from really, really awful to really good, and of course the ones you hear about are the awful ones. But I think it's probably, if as an industry you want to argue that you should be self-regulated, then you need to do that self-regulating. You need to clean up the ones that aren't following the rules. Otherwise, the alternative is proper regulation. So
Expand a little on how you would expect you talk about the industry as a generality. Here we have 3 practitioners in the industry. How do they get the non-compliant agents to comply?
Yeah, well, I don't
What do you
really
do?
know.
Yes, but if I may suggest, you're being idealistic. Nothing wrong with that, but now be practical. How can we do this? That's what I'd like to get some feel for.
Well, I suppose, you know, self-policing of other people in your industry. You know, there's was it Essex? There's a case that's come before the Competition and Markets Authority recently. I think it's a group of agents in Essex. They all colluded not to display their fees.
Correct.
And they've all rightly been brought up for it. So, you know, that kind of practice needs to be stamped out, and the opposite needs to be introduced. You know, if you see an agent that's not displaying their fees, you need to report them. You know, they're affecting your sort of image as a letting agent.
Mark, have you ever seen an agent not displaying their fees? Are you aware? Have you ever reported them?
No.
Why not?
Would it be a 2-pointed question to ask why not?
No, not at all. No, because if you do report them, then there's nothing that comes back on you. It doesn't get reported that you reported them. So that doesn't worry me.
But the image of letting agents is done down by those.
Absolutely, totally agree.
There may not be an answer to that.
50-50 with that. It's probably not an answer. I haven't done it because I feel as though they should just carry on and not display their fees. I don't agree with it, obviously. But it doesn't mean to say that I have to spend my time looking at agents and then reporting them and grassing them up as such for not doing that. I suppose there's...
So is it a bit like walking down the street and seeing somebody drop litter? You're not going to go running off to some PCS and say,
no, that's
look,
right.
they just dropped litter.
Yeah.
But then you wouldn't necessarily be seen as a litter picker for them dropping litter, whereas in this situation we're talking about the image of letting agents being done down by the worst ones.
And you're talking about a self-policing side of things, which if regulation is going to be brought in, then I believe that actually they should have a structure in place that polices these people. You know, it shouldn't just be down to us as an industry. Yeah. We've got our own things that we worry about. If we stick to the regulation, why the hell should we be police officers at the same time? You know.
Let me from self-policing, if I may. It's actually just not that easy. We've had contact with agents for maybe 5 years who've been absolutely fine. And then in the 6th year, something's happened in that industry, and all of a sudden things have changed. Fees are one thing, deposits, protection, and not getting deposits back are much bigger than the fees that are charged up front. And those things can just happen overnight. And it's just not possible for another agent to know what's going on in a different agent to try and self-police that. If the fees are transparent and on the website, which only 66% in Waltham Forest are, then there's transparency. There's natural regulation of every agency. So maybe it should more be a drive of making sure that everybody complies with the current legislation, rather than trying to dob in someone that you actually don't know what they're doing. Because let's be honest, agency as well, you might start ending up getting 100 visits, Mark, from the trading standards or whoever, just because some other agent doesn't like you.
If a tenant wanted to find out how much we charged a landlord, it would be easy enough to find out.
Yeah, well, the first thing we advise people
on
to do is
website.
go to the land registry, find out the name of their landlord for 3 months, and then get in touch with them, because then they can cut out, you know...
But you just have to go onto the agent's website and it's there.
It's there.
In the same way, by a huge margin, than brand new tenancies.
That I can confirm that.
Because the argument goes, the landlord would prefer to have the devil they know, a good, steady, paying tenant, than try and screw another 50 quid a week.
Or to have a void, because you've only got to have a month,
Yes.
2 months.
So I would counsel you, just from my own experience, to talk to Kate about the percentages that she's found.
Bill, if that was referred to you, you know, I've lived here for 3 years, and I'm now just renewing my tenancy, and I've been charged £500 for the renewal fee. What were the Ombudsman's?
Well, the Ombudsman, I'm not, bear in mind, I'm the chairman of the board, not the Ombudsman himself. But having said that, the Ombudsman would look at the contract and see what the contract said and what the contract was between the two of them. And if, of course, it's a new contract, they'd have to look at that and see what the terms
If-
of that
if-
are.
And
And
it
I think
should-
that if it was not, but
What
the
if it was
Ombudsman is able
silent?
to say,
What if it was silent on the matter of
well, I think then the Ombudsman would take the view of what's fair and reasonable in all
Yes,
circumstances.
yes. You see, it shouldn't be a surprise because they should have been very aware of what the fee
The
would be
renewal fee
if
was.
they renewed the tenancy before they entered into the tenancy agreement to start with, because those charges should have
Which
all
is
been
actually a
set out for them.
requirement
It is.
for us
As
to let them
ours
know
are.
anyway,
So
so
they
that's already
it
in
wouldn't be a
place.
surprise. It would be like when I took the tenancy, I knew that if I renewed the contract, there'd be an admin fee for drawing up legal documentation when I renewed it of £120 or whatever it is.
That's fine for £120. It's when it's 750.
I agree.
Of course.
I agree.
And,
I agree.
and you're
And what
a
we're
young
talking
person
about is
and you didn't
greed.
actually look at
Greed
all
is
this
the
very
problem.
carefully.
Yes.
Greed is the problem.
So-
Whether it's
So what we're
landlords,
saying is it's not the
who are
agent's
not
fault,
doing what
it's
they
your
should be
guys'
doing.
fault for not letting them know what their legal rights are.
You know, and I
No,
was
no.
involved with Arla for many years, on the
next door.
council, and you know everything they do is to try and raise tenants' awareness about you should not go to an agent that isn't a member of Arla.
Yes.
Oh,
What
so-
about the 3.5 million unregulated landlords?
Yeah.
Well, there
Yeah.
again, the same problem is greed, where
It is.
landlords want to get the rent, but they don't want to meet their other responsibilities in
Absolutely.
terms of maintaining the property, making it safe, and it's greed. It's just I want all the rent, but
Yes.
I don't want to be paying out for all these things I should be doing, like EPCs
Yeah.
and gas safeties.
But they're not getting that grief, the agents are. So
Well,
that-
Guts.
Again, I'm just going to, because I feel so passionate about this, I really do, and I would beg for one of you to spend just 2 days in a letting agency. It would be incredible. You would see the level of demand that we experience from tenants, and you would also see the shrewdness of some landlords that would literally, if we had to justify those fees to the landlord, in other words, we're not charging the tenant anymore. Bearing in mind we're a business, we need to make money because we've got staff and overheads. That means that money has to come from somewhere, and that will be the landlords. There's nowhere else we can get that money from. If the landlords are being charged that additional money, they will 110% claw it back from the rent.
We're less. I mean, there are problems with withholding deposits or fees and agent abuse of those situations. You know, for example, encouraging tenants to take a property even though the agent realises they're not going to pass the affordability checks. So I think
that's
I mean
unlikely.
that's by the by, but I think
Can I?
You can't
can-
force someone to hand over money for something that they're
no,
not
sorry.
going to take.
So what I meant is they don't force. They're not forcing tenants to, but they're saying, this tenant seems to be a bit low on the income threshold.
I think
I'd like to just. I'd like to pin you down. I'd like to pin you down, Dan, on that.
Uh-huh.
How many specific cases can you name from this year where that has happened, and that you have documentary evidence?
Problem is that neither of our organisations have the budget for quantitative research. That's,
But
you know, we're tiny.
with respect, and I'm not taking sides in any way, shape, or form on this, because you are a movement, and you do get press. If you throw allegations around like you do, you must be able to back them up. And therefore, I'm sitting here as a recipient of what you've just said, and I'm thinking, well, go on then, tell me how many. And if you can't, then you shouldn't put it out.
So should the agent be charging a professional fee, like a solicitor would, to create all of the documents, to go through that 15-point list of ensuring that you have compliance and everything else? I will charge you £2,000, which is what a lawyer would if it was a conveyance.
This is the incredible thing, and that's a really good
and then
point.
I'll charge a fee for my management.
If you
which is
got a
whatever
solicitor
percentage
to
they're
draw
at.
up the AST,
I know.
you would be looking at double the amount we charge.
Yeah, I know.
Or an accountant, or any other
Or an
That's the
professional
thing.
accountant,
person.
or a
But I think,
We already
Bill,
have a
as Bill
situation
said,
with
it's the elements which benefit both parties. So I think our view, is that a properly drawn up tenancy agreement,
Benefits
legally
both.
binding, benefits both parties. And the inventory benefits both parties, and those are the shared costs involved.
They may not have charged for all these things. They certainly would have charged for the inventory. They certainly would have charged for the condition. They certainly would have charged for the agreement. But they might not have charged for some of the other things which you now charge for. And of course those things have
Well,
come
they're
in.
new things because it's deposit protection, it's gas safeties,
Yeah.
it's they're referencing.
They are.
They're all new things that we charge for, which are in our case a lot of the time just passing on the cost to the
I think
landlord.
that's fair.
But going back to the private rented sector 30, 40 years ago, our firm charged in exactly the same way as we do now for the tenancy agreement and the inventory. It was a shared cost because it was deemed to have a benefit to both parties. But I think what's happened, as you say, Bill, with the rise of not only in the private rental sector, the number of people renting, but also the number of letting agents. And because letting agents have come into the game fairly recently, and they've been greedy. And they've been charging too much, and this is why you guys have had to come along and start to try and destroy letting agents.
Mentioned Mr. Corbyn just now.
That's it.
Yeah.
And I disagree with just about everything he says, except for one thing.
Go on.
And I think the one thing he does say is, why can't we build any council houses?
Yeah.
And I think it may well have been right when Mrs. Thatcher actually determined to sell them, because I think you were giving an equity base to quite a lot of people in the marketplace. And that's, if you go back to other places like Singapore, where 85 to 90% of the property was owned by the government.
Or you could argue they sold off the national silver.
Oh, hang on. But what they did is, they sold the national silver to the population. So what they did in Singapore was to give a huge equity base to most families within that thing. Now, just go on. So I actually think that the time is now that you should build council houses, and the reason for that is because they're the only people that can actually get a consent in a reasonable time and not have to pay a fortune in 106 or rather whatever they now call a 106 agreement, which could be 30 or 40% of it. So they are in a position to be actually able to provide relatively low cost housing, because all they've got to do is to balance the book. On land which a lot of them would probably already own, so they wouldn't have to charge a fortune for that if they didn't want to. And they would be in a much better position to build things more quickly. And that, I think, is where we actually have a real problem, because even housing associations have to go through a complete machination of what the demand is. The demand is normally divided by 3 by the time you actually get to the number, and you finish up with building a very small number of housing association units relative to the demand in a particular area, and it takes them quite a long time, and the cost for running those housing associations is quite considerable, whereas I think you could do it more cheaply in a council and you'd get them more quickly. And therefore I would support Mr. Corbyn on that, but probably in nothing else.
I don't disagree. There's a need to build more housing so that there isn't such a unbalance between the supply and the demand. But when you were saying about tenants needing to rent a property, so they have to go to that agent, irrespective of whether they're a good agent or a bad agent, that's where we need the awareness to be with landlords, so that landlords know, I mustn't use an agent that isn't stamped with this, whatever it is, so that those agents don't get the properties, therefore that they don't get the tenants. So that's where it needs to start, is that the landlords will only use a reputable, good agent.
I'll just say something on that. Why shouldn't you use me?
I said stamped with whatever.
Right. I was going to say.
I said stamped with whatever. There needs to be an across the board something that says you're a good agent, you're fine, you're not, you can't come in, like travel agents, ABTA, whatever it is.
Sure.
And they comply with this, tick a box on everything they need to do, their fees aren't unreasonable, everything else, and tenants can go to them and know that they're going to get a good, they're not going to get ripped off.
Yes. Okay.
It doesn't necessarily make the landlord, it doesn't necessarily change what the landlord does. If we had mandatory licensing, which we are both in favour of, part of that mandatory licensing would be that landlords would have to pass some sort of basic, driving test in housing law, just basic things, the things that they would otherwise hand over to a letting agent. Then
can I ask you then? Do you think that it would work in practice? Some of the properties that Charlie went to see, you may not have seen. You won't have seen the article that you wrote. It was shocking as to what he was seeing, and I'm sure you've seen it in different forms.
Yeah, I mean there were 26 people living in 3 bedrooms.
But do you really think that a true rogue landlord, and let's call them that in this particular case, wouldn't be doing deals with, I'm not being political, but let's just say an immigrant family? I'll do you a deal, you can have this place for such and such, but you don't tell anybody that you're renting it from me or whatever it is. The deals will go under the under the table? Do you think that's a possibility?
I think, yeah, with all regulation, there's always the possibility that you'll push something underground. But the point is, everything is underground at the moment because the regulation isn't there. So.
But would it be easy? Okay, I'm just developing the last bit of the theme that I wanted to get to, was that if in an ideal world we said that all lettings had to be handled through accredited agents, call it what you will, so you can't be a private landlord direct to a tenant. There has to be the intermediary of an agent. You would end up with a situation where agents were dealing with more properties to rent. Their fee incomes in scale go up. They wouldn't have to charge the tenants the fees, and you would have far fewer entities to regulate, because generally speaking, the agents are traceable. They are a presence online. They have either an office or an online presence, whatever it may be. I would speculate, if I may, that if you tried to do it with individual landlord licensing, it would be like herding cats. Where we might go, if Dan and Rosie had their way, you might end up with a situation where you have worse than we have now.
But you could do, yes.
Can I just say, so you've got the option of not having to use letting agents.
Yeah.
Right.
And that's
We're a business,
Yeah.
so we've got to make money, right?
Yeah, but you can't force it out of people.
But we're not forcing it out of people. I just said you've got an option.
Yeah.
I'm not forcing it out of you.
So that's good, isn't it?
Yeah, that's great.
I had to see where that was going to go.
I'm not forcing anything out of you. So if you want to go for one of my properties, that is what I charge.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't go for one of your properties then, because I
That's
wouldn't
fine.
feel those things justified.
So why can't?
Sorry,
So as a question, so can I put that into a context?
Yes. Yeah.
Why is it not then acceptable for the rest of the market to exercise that option if they wish? The people that you would represent or you would campaign on behalf of have an option. Is that if you've got an option, presumably they have.
You're talking about the option of not having a house.
No. I'm talking about not using
I
it.
just said you said that you had an option of using Gumtree or going privately.
They have houses.
Go privately.
So it's like anything.
Apparently.
If you want something from someone, you bloody pay for it. Surely we're not in a generation now where we expect everything free of charge. Surely we know that there are costs associated. And I know that you're saying that tenants shouldn't be charged at all, but surely if I'm doing work and you're getting something for it...
If you're doing the work, yes.
But
yeah,
we are.
Yeah, but what
Is that
we
should I
find...
work for free?
No, but what we find often is, somebody can find a flat online, either on Gumtree or on Rightmove or whatever. They can do all the work. They go and look at it. They go and look for all the different flats that they want to see, and then they have to pay the agent fee. And that's for
the flats that you see on Rightmove are represented by an agent. You cannot go and have a look at them without the agent with you, and therefore there is someone with you in order to be.
Yes, Rightmove may not have been the right example, but I know what you were saying.
Yeah.
You can go online. And you can
there's
find,
all sorts of different, and now I think there are lots of market solutions that are coming forward, which I guess you guys will have to respond to, like Easy Property, which charges a flat fee of £50 to the tenant, Open Rent, which charges £20. That there are lots of market solutions now.
Because a lot of landlords don't want to do their own viewings and they don't want to deal with the tenant direct. A lot of landlords choose an agent because they don't want that interaction with the tenants.
It's 50% PR, 50% rogue, whether that's the odd agent, but possibly the huge majority of
You're not saying 50%
landlords.
of the market is rogue?
Not agents, no, absolutely not. There's 5.3 million lets in this country now, which is up about 2.1 million in the last 4 years. Of those, only 2.6 million are actually conducted through agency. So half and half are private. Where there is, although the law still exists, there's limited legislation because again, tenants are being asked to police that area of the industry, and frankly, they just want somewhere to live, so they're not overly concerned about policing it. They just want somewhere to be. So the 50% that is trying to be right and is trying to be good, which is the agents, maybe can influence the fact that landlords should be placing their properties with them rather than doing it privately if legislation is actually followed up. The 50%, however, that are trying to do it right seem to be getting 100% of the grief. And I think that's down to maybe associations, maybe the way we all market ourselves, and perhaps ways in which we can take bodies such as generation rent and right to rent and shelter, who unfortunately declined to attend today, and can try and work together and promote a more positive industry, remove the very small rogue elements which we've already established as probably 1 in 100, and get a decent place for people to live at a fair price in this country, which is after all the bedrock of our society. And if by meetings like this we can start to progress that, so much the better. It's been a worthwhile lunch.
Yep.
Thank you, Peter. And I, on behalf of everybody, I'd like to thank you for hosting us.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very
Very
much.
much.
Yeah.